It takes a couple of flicks before the lighter finally catches, its flame trembling for a moment before you bring it up to your face. You lean in, the paper ignites, and a slow coil of smoke begins to curl into the air. The scent, earthy, woody, and unmistakable, immediately fills the space, seeping toward the open window where it's swept away on a warm afternoon draft. Your eyes half close as you inhale deeply, chest expanding, lungs absorbing the warmth. For a moment, everything slows, but that gentle haze raises bigger questions. On a chemical level, on a biological level, what is it about this humble green plant that captivates millions around the world? How far back does our relationship with it stretch? And what exactly is happening inside your body and mind right now? To understand, we need to start not with a high, but with the plant itself. Cannabis has its roots, quite literally, in Central and South Asia. Yet today it's so widespread that it supports a vast global trade. From tiny hillside plots tended by hand to high-tech cultivation facilities, and even to massive illicit farms operating out of sight, the scope is immense. Experts estimate there are more than 700 distinct varieties available, and that number continues to climb as growers experiment with new hybrids. In regions where cannabis is legally regulated, identifying the strain you're holding is straightforward. Labels tell you the name, potency, and sometimes even terpene profiles. But in places where possession is still a crime, figuring out exactly what's in your hand is far trickier. You might be holding something grown halfway around the world, or perhaps from a neighbor's discreet backyard patch. And without testing, you can't be certain what compounds it contains. Two chemical names dominate the conversation: cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol, more commonly known as CBD and THC. Over the past decade, especially in Western markets, CBD has been promoted as a possible therapeutic game changer. Early research suggests it may help calm anxiety, reduce muscle spasms, improve sleep quality, and is even under investigation for conditions like psychosis. You've likely seen it infused into oils, creams, or gummies, each claiming a laundry list of benefits. The science is ongoing, but one thing is clear. CBD, by itself, does not cause the euphoric high people associate with cannabis. That intoxicating effect comes from THC, the plant's most potent psychoactive element. While CBD can shift your mood toward a calmer, more settled state, THC is the compound that alters perception in a more noticeable way. And cannabis plants usually contain far more THC than CBD, especially strains cultivated for recreational use. To see the process in motion, picture yourself inhaling again. The smoke, dense with THC molecules, rushes into your lungs. Some people immediately feel a tickle that triggers a cough, a reflex caused by inhaling heated foreign particles. This is common with tobacco smoke too, so it's not unique to cannabis. Your lungs aren't just hollow sacs of air. They're an intricate network of branching passages ending in microscopic sacs called alveoli. Imagine hundreds of millions of tiny bubbles, about 480 million in a typical adult, each surrounded by a web of capillaries. These alveoli are designed to swap oxygen for carbon dioxide at incredible speed, and they can just as easily absorb other gases and vapors into your bloodstream. Inhaling cannabis smoke delivers THC to those alveoli, which then push it directly into your blood. From there, it's just seconds before it reaches your brain. Once THC crosses the blood-brain barrier, it binds to special sites on nerve cells known as cannabinoid receptors. These receptors are part of a broader network called the endocannabinoid system, which influences mood, memory, appetite, and pain perception. CBD interacts with these receptors too, but often in different ways. Consider the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain that helps regulate fear and emotional responses. CBD's influence here can be soothing, blunting excessive anxiety. THC, however, can sometimes overstimulate this region, especially in high doses, which explains why some users feel uneasy or paranoid after consuming strong strains. Other brain regions join the party as well. The basal ganglia, which coordinate movement, the neocortex, which processes sensory information, and the cerebellum, which fine-tunes motor skills. All of these experience a shift in activity under THC's influence. This slowdown is why reaction times lengthen and speech or movement can become sluggish. In situations requiring fast decisions, such as driving, this impairment can be dangerous. Studies have shown that operating a vehicle while high can significantly increase the likelihood of accidents, sometimes more than doubling the risk. The lingering chemical traces in your body complicate things further. THC and its byproducts can stay detectable in different ways for varying lengths of time. Blood tests might catch it for 2 days or more, saliva for up to 3, urine anywhere from 3 to 30 days, and hair samples can reveal use months later. Yet focusing only on cannabis's sedating effects would be misleading. THC can also heighten sensory perception, making colors appear more vivid, music richer, and flavors more intense. This altered perception often fuels what's famously called the munchies, where food seems irresistible and deeply satisfying. Many creative individuals throughout history have experimented with cannabis, crediting it with sparking fresh perspectives or novel ideas. The combined dampening of pain and anxiety with an enhancement of sensory enjoyment can create an overall sense of euphoria. This is the high many seek, a blend of relaxation and stimulation that can be deeply pleasurable. But the experience varies widely. Factors like strain, dosage, and delivery method all play a role. Smoking and vaping produce rapid effects, but these usually fade within a few hours. Edible forms, brownies, gummies, or infused beverages, take longer to kick in because they're processed by the digestive system. Once absorbed, however, they can deliver effects that last much longer, sometimes the better part of a day. This variability is part of what makes cannabis research complex. 2 people can consume the same amount in the same way and have very different experiences, influenced by biology, tolerance, and even mindset. The human brain is astonishingly intricate. Just a speck of tissue the size of a grain of sand can contain around 100,000 neurons and 1 billion synaptic connections. Scaling that up to the full brain underscores how challenging it is to measure exactly how a substance like THC alters its function. For one person, a single puff might spark hours of unease. For another, it might produce nothing but serene contentment. And while occasional use in safe settings tends to carry low immediate risk, the bigger debate is cultural, political, and historical. To explore that, we need to look backward, thousands of years backward. Records suggest humans have been using cannabis for medicinal purposes since at least 2800 BCE, with the first documented reference attributed to an ancient Chinese ruler, often called the father of herbal medicine. From there, its use spread through India, the Middle East, and into Europe, where it was prescribed for ailments ranging from joint inflammation to digestive troubles. Over time, cannabis found roles not only in healing but in spiritual and ritual contexts. In Hindu tradition, the deity Shiva has long been associated with the plant, and offerings containing cannabis have been part of certain religious observances. In retrospect, modern science can explain some of these ancient practices. THC can reduce body temperature slightly, which would have eased fevers and perhaps reinforced the belief in divine intervention. So how did a plant with such a lengthy and varied history become, in some regions, as stigmatized as substances like heroin or cocaine? The answer winds through centuries of trade, lawmaking, and shifting public perception. In the early 1600s, hemp, cannabis's non-intoxicating cousin, was a vital crop in North American colonies, valued for its strong fibers. By the 1800s, Western physicians were exploring its medicinal potential after learning of its uses in other parts of the world. But as drug regulations evolved, cannabis began to be lumped together with more dangerous substances, partly due to efforts to tighten control over all psychoactive products. By the late 19th century, social spaces dedicated to smoking cannabis or its derivatives were popular in some cities, frequented by a range of social classes. However, concerns about misuse and the broader push for prohibition, most famously with alcohol, eventually swept cannabis into the same legal category as harder drugs. In the 20th century, the political framing of drug use shifted dramatically. Campaigns warning of dire social consequences, along with strict enforcement policies, entrenched cannabis's illegal status in many countries. The war on drugs era devoted massive resources to eradication and punishment, often grouping cannabis with substances that posed far greater health risks. Much of the messaging leaned heavily on fear. Claims that it destroyed brain cells inevitably led to harder drugs or caused uncontrollable addiction. While some of these warnings had a sliver of truth under specific circumstances, many were exaggerated or based on limited evidence. This sets the stage for the next part of our journey, where we'll separate myth from fact, examine the real potential risks, and understand why cannabis continues to sit in a uniquely complicated place in modern society. In much of the rhetoric surrounding cannabis, the warnings are blunt and absolute. You've likely heard them. It will ruin your brain, send you down a path toward harder substances, or leave you hopelessly dependent. But how much of that is grounded in verifiable evidence? And how much has been shaped by decades of political campaigns, sensational headlines, and cultural bias? One of the most persistent claims is that marijuana rots the brain. This phrase conjures images of physical decay. But in reality, brain tissue doesn't simply decompose because of cannabis exposure. The cells aren't literally disintegrating. Where the discussion becomes more nuanced is in the realm of mental health. And here, the conversation gets complicated. Some research has found correlations between heavy cannabis use and certain mental health conditions, particularly psychotic disorders. But causation is much harder to pin down. Psychosis itself isn't a single, simple illness. It's a broad term describing situations where someone's perception of reality becomes distorted. The two hallmark symptoms are hallucinations, experiencing sensations that aren't truly occurring, and delusions, believing things that don't align with objective reality. Hallucinations can affect any of the senses: hearing voices that don't exist, seeing images that aren't present, even smelling or tasting things that aren't there. Delusions, on the other hand, often center on unshakable false beliefs, such as the conviction that someone is following you or that coworkers are secretly plotting against you. THC, because of its potent psychoactive properties, can influence how these experiences manifest in vulnerable individuals. While CBD might counteract some of the anxious or paranoid sensations, many recreational strains are bred to maximize THC content and minimize CBD. This imbalance can sometimes tip susceptible brains toward heightened paranoia or distorted thinking, especially in people who already carry a genetic predisposition toward mental health disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It's important to note that only a small portion of the population is at significant risk for this kind of reaction. For most, cannabis will not trigger psychosis, but in those predisposed, it can act as a catalyst, accelerating the onset or intensifying symptoms that might otherwise have remained dormant. This is why conversations about cannabis and mental health often focus on moderation and self-awareness rather than blanket prohibition. Another accusation often leveled at marijuana is that it serves as a gateway drug. The idea is simple. Once someone experiences the altered state cannabis offers, they'll seek out stronger, more dangerous highs. While this pattern does occur for some individuals, studies suggest the phenomenon is not unique to cannabis. Alcohol and nicotine, both legal in most countries, also demonstrate similar gateway patterns. Interestingly, many researchers point to a different, less chemical gateway: life circumstances. People who endure significant trauma, abuse, neglect, chronic stress, are statistically far more likely to develop problematic relationships with substances. In these cases, cannabis might be part of their path, but it's rarely the starting cause. More often, it's a symptom of deeper emotional or psychological pain, not the original trigger. Then there's the question of whether cannabis is addictive. The answer depends on how we define the word. Consider your morning coffee routine. The caffeine gives you a boost, sharpens your focus, and lifts your mood. After weeks or months of daily consumption, your body adapts, expecting that regular dose. Skip it one morning, and you might feel irritable, sluggish, or headachy. This isn't necessarily addiction in the clinical sense, it's dependence. With cannabis, a similar pattern can emerge. Regular use can train the brain to anticipate that daily chemical change, leading to cravings or discomfort when it's absent. Sleep might be harder to come by, appetite might dip, moods might sour. But in most cases, these withdrawal effects fade within a couple of weeks. This is one reason experts often distinguish between dependence, which is temporary and relatively easy to reverse, and addiction, which is deeper, more persistent, and harder to break. Dependence on cannabis is not rare. Some estimates suggest around a third of regular users experience it at some point. True addiction, though, is less common and is more likely to develop in those who begin heavy use before their brain is fully matured. Adolescent brains are still wiring themselves for adulthood, and introducing frequent, strong doses of THC during that time can shape neural pathways in ways that make long-term reliance more likely. Understanding all of this requires seeing cannabis for what it is: neither a harmless miracle plant nor an inevitable ruin. It has benefits and risks, both shaped by how, when, and why it's used. The key lies in balance and in making informed choices, something history has not always encouraged. To grasp how we've arrived at today's conflicted landscape, it's worth revisiting the 20th century's war on drugs. When that phrase was popularized in the early 1970s, it came with a clear message. Drug use was an enemy to be defeated, and the primary weapon would be aggressive law enforcement. Cannabis, despite its differences from far more lethal drugs, was swept into the same net. The approach was punitive. Arrests for possession soared. Long prison sentences were handed out for even small amounts. Governments invested staggering sums into these campaigns, tens of billions each year, funding eradication programs, border enforcement, and incarceration. In many ways, the war was less about the chemistry of each drug and more about projecting control over public behavior. Fear-based messaging was a major part of the strategy. Anti-drug campaigns portrayed cannabis as a direct route to ruin, causing permanent brain damage, leading inevitably to harder drugs, and ensnaring anyone who tried it in a cycle of addiction. These claims, while effective at stirring public concern, often glossed over nuance. They made little room for scientific complexity or for the reality that individual experiences vary widely. This climate of fear had real consequences. It influenced how research was funded, or, in many cases, blocked altogether. It shaped laws that still persist in some places, where possession of even tiny amounts can result in life-altering legal trouble. It also built a cultural narrative that still lingers, that cannabis is inherently as dangerous as any other controlled substance. As the years have passed, new studies and shifting public opinion have chipped away at some of these older assumptions. Many regions have legalized cannabis for medical purposes, and some have moved to full recreational legalization. These changes have opened the door to more rigorous research, allowing scientists to examine cannabis's effects with greater precision and less political interference. Still, the debates remain. Advocates highlight its potential for pain management, seizure control, and mental health support. Opponents point to impaired driving, mental health risks, and the possibility of long-term dependency. Both sides have evidence to support their concerns, and both sometimes cherry-pick the data that best fits their narrative. Where does that leave us? In a place where the conversation must be grounded in reality. Cannabis can be harmful, especially in excessive or poorly managed use. But it's not the universal menace once painted in propaganda films. It can be beneficial, particularly in carefully dosed medical contexts. But it's not the flawless cure-all some marketing would have you believe. Ultimately, separating myth from fact requires an honest look at what the science says, a recognition of the gaps in our knowledge, and an understanding of the cultural baggage still attached to this plant. And in the next stage of our journey, we'll explore exactly that. The fine line between responsible use and risky habits, how to tell the difference, and why this conversation continues to evolve in ways no one could have predicted a few decades ago. When people talk about responsible cannabis use, they're often thinking about moderation and quantity. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. How often it's consumed, the potency of the strain, the method of intake, and even the mindset and setting all play significant roles in shaping the experience. Two people could use the exact same amount of the same product and walk away with entirely different results, depending on their body chemistry, tolerance level, and emotional state. Take the method of consumption, for example. Smoking delivers a rapid onset. Within moments, THC begins binding to receptors, producing noticeable effects. This quick delivery appeals to many, but it also makes it easier to overshoot the desired level and end up feeling too high. Edibles, on the other hand, can be deceptive. They take much longer to kick in, anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, because the cannabinoids must be digested and metabolized before entering the bloodstream. The trade-off is that the high from edibles often lasts significantly longer, sometimes up to 12 hours or more. and it can feel more intense due to the way the liver converts THC into a different, more potent form. This unpredictability is one of the reasons cannabis research remains complex. Scientists trying to measure its effects must account for enormous variability, not only in individual physiology, but also in the chemical diversity of the plant itself. There are hundreds of cannabinoids and aromatic compounds called terpenes in cannabis, and their concentrations differ drastically between strains. These subtle chemical shifts can change how the experience feels, how long it lasts, and how it interacts with the body's natural systems. And then there's the brain, a landscape of staggering complexity. Imagine a network so dense that a pinch of brain tissue no bigger than a grain of sand contains around 100,000 neurons and 1 billion connections. Every puff, every edible, every oil droplet enters into this unfathomably intricate system, influencing processes like memory, perception, and emotional regulation. Measuring that influence precisely is a challenge scientists have been grappling with for decades. The results? Inconclusive in many areas. Some users experience enhanced creativity, sharpened sensory perception, and deep relaxation. Others, under similar circumstances, may feel uneasy, lethargic, or disoriented. That's part of what makes cannabis so intriguing. It defies a one-size-fits-all description. From a safety standpoint, occasional use by adults in controlled environments carries relatively low short-term risk. But even here, there are important caveats. Tasks requiring quick reflexes, driving, operating heavy machinery, or performing detailed manual work become riskier under the influence. The slowdown in reaction time, coupled with altered perception, means the odds of making critical mistakes increase significantly. Studies in various countries have linked cannabis-impaired driving to higher accident rates, reinforcing why most legal systems maintain strict limits on THC presence in drivers. What about the lingering traces cannabis leaves behind? Its active components are fat-soluble, meaning they bind to the body's fat stores and are released slowly over time. That's why THC can remain detectable in urine for weeks after heavy use, even when no psychoactive effects are present. For occasional users, the window is shorter, but for regular consumers, the chemical footprint lingers long after the last session. Blood and saliva tests generally have shorter detection periods, while hair follicle analysis can reveal use months later. Beyond the science and safety considerations lies the long shadow of history. Cannabis's journey from ancient medicine to prohibited substance, to cautiously accepted therapeutic option, is woven into larger cultural and political stories. For centuries, it was embraced in some parts of the world as a valuable crop and a respected healing aid. It held a place in religious ceremonies, in folk remedies, and in the early pharmacopoeias of emerging medical systems. Then came the waves of prohibition, driven by shifting social norms, economic interests, and geopolitical strategies. In many places, cannabis became a symbol, either of counterculture rebellion or of social decay, depending on who was telling the story. Laws hardened, enforcement intensified, and the plant's reputation was reshaped less by its chemistry than by the narratives built around it. The war on drugs era, in particular, cemented an image of cannabis as a dangerous gateway to moral and societal collapse. Public service announcements depicted users sliding rapidly into ruin, their lives destroyed by the first puff. While such depictions ignored the experiences of countless moderate, responsible consumers, they had a profound impact on public opinion and policy. The science was overshadowed by the story, and that story was one of fear. In recent decades, the pendulum has begun to swing back. Evidence supporting medical applications has grown, particularly for conditions like chronic pain, certain forms of epilepsy, and nausea related to chemotherapy. Legal reforms have followed, from tightly regulated medical programs to full recreational legalization in some countries and states. These shifts have also created an environment for more open, well-funded research. Research that can explore both the benefits and the drawbacks without the same degree of political interference. Still, legalization brings its own challenges. Markets flooded with high-potency products can push consumers, especially inexperienced ones, into uncomfortable territory. Edibles, concentrates, and vape cartridges can contain THC levels far above what was common in earlier decades, increasing the risk of overconsumption and adverse effects. Education becomes critical here. Knowing one's limits, starting with small doses, and being mindful of the delayed onset of some products can mean the difference between a pleasant experience and an overwhelming one. The broader societal impacts are also complex. Legal cannabis can generate significant tax revenue, create jobs, and undercut illegal markets. But it also raises questions about public health, workplace safety, and youth access. Balancing these competing interests requires careful policy design and ongoing adaptation as new data emerges. And then there's the cultural element. The way cannabis use is portrayed in media, discussed in communities, and integrated into social life. In some circles, it's celebrated, almost ritualized. In others, it's still whispered about or condemned outright. This cultural duality means individuals often navigate not only the effects of the plant itself, but also the weight of others' perceptions. On a personal level, deciding whether and how to use cannabis involves more than simply weighing its risks and benefits. It's about understanding one's own health, habits, and goals. For someone managing chronic pain, the calculation might look very different than for someone seeking occasional relaxation. For an artist chasing inspiration, the priorities will differ again from those of an athlete mindful of reaction times and coordination. The key, as with so many aspects of life, lies in informed choice. Recognizing that cannabis can offer comfort, creativity, and relief, but also that it carries the potential for dependence, cognitive impairment, and in rare cases, mental health complications. Seeing it as neither a villain nor a savior, but as a tool, one that demands respect and awareness to be used wisely. If there's one takeaway, it's that cannabis is a subject where absolutes rarely apply. The truth exists in shades of green, shaped by context, dose, individual biology, and culture. It has been revered, reviled, celebrated, and condemned. And in each era, those attitudes have said as much about society as they have about the plant itself. Looking forward, the conversation will continue to evolve. As more countries and states reassess their laws, as more studies illuminate long-term effects, and as more personal stories enter the public sphere, cannabis will remain at the intersection of science, politics, and personal freedom. Whether that leads to universal acceptance, renewed restrictions, or something in between will depend on how willing we are to replace fear and myth with curiosity and understanding. Until then, the best we can do is approach the topic with open minds, critical thinking, and an appreciation for the complexity it deserves. Cannabis is not simply a substance. It's a mirror, reflecting our evolving relationship with nature, health, and each other. And in that reflection, we might just find that the real challenge isn't in understanding the plant, but in understanding ourselves.